What would you do if you opened a stranger's lunchbox and found your dead mother staring back at you? Not a photograph, not a belonging, but something far more impossible: her handwriting, her exact words, the same note she used to tuck into your backpack 20 years ago when you were too poor to eat. Connor Reed, a billionaire CEO, was about to discover that sometimes the past doesn't stay buried, and sometimes the people we never notice are carrying pieces of our hearts. It was 11:43 p.m. in the executive suite of Northbridge Systems, Seattle's most powerful tech empire. The city sparkled below like scattered diamonds, but Connor wasn't looking at the view. He just finished a brutal meeting about budget cuts, the kind where numbers on spreadsheets translated to real people losing their livelihoods. Exhausted, he walked into the executive pantry for coffee. That's when he saw it. A battered blue lunchbox sat on the pristine marble counter, held together with layers of duct tape. It looked completely out of place among the designer espresso machines and imported mineral water. His first thought was to call security and have it removed. But something stopped him. A strip of masking tape on the lid, faded handwriting, words that whispered of desperation and love. His hand reached out before his mind could stop it. Inside the lunchbox, a sandwich wrapped in wax paper. Homemade soup in a recycled container. One apple slightly bruised, and a note folded with such care it looked like a prayer. Connor's fingers trembled as he unfolded it. Save the soup for Thursday. Don't skip again. The world stopped spinning. That handwriting, that slanted S, that firm period pressed into the paper like a command from someone who refused to let hunger win. His mother had been dead for 3 years. He'd watched her casket lowered into the ground. He'd scattered her ashes. He'd donated every single item she owned because the memories were too painful to keep. So why was he holding her handwriting in his hands? Why did this note sound exactly like the hundreds she'd written when he was a child, when they were so poor that splitting meals meant survival, when his mother worked 3 jobs and still wrote him love notes disguised as food instructions? Connor's throat closed. His eyes burned. This was impossible. The door swung open behind him. Connor spun around. A shy girl in a cleaning uniform stood frozen in the doorway, her face draining of all color. She was small, thin, with downcast eyes and clothes that had seen too many washes. The kind of person who'd perfected the art of being invisible, but right now she looked absolutely terrified. Her eyes locked on the lunchbox in his hands, on the note between his fingers. "I'm so sorry, sir," she whispered, her voice barely reaching across the space. "That's mine. Please. I didn't mean to leave it there. Please don't." Connor's voice came out rougher than he intended. "This note. Where did you get this?" The girl's hands started shaking. She took a step backward. "Please," she said again, reaching out like she was trying to protect something precious. "It's just my lunchbox. I'll take it and leave. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." But Connor couldn't let it go, couldn't breathe, couldn't think past the impossible reality in his hands. "This handwriting," he said, and his voice cracked. "This exact handwriting. Where did you get it?" The shy girl's eyes filled with tears. She clutched her hands together, and Connor noticed they were red and raw from cleaning chemicals. "I bought it," she whispered, "at a thrift store. 3 years ago. The notes were inside." Connor's heart stopped. 3 years ago. Right when his mother died. Right when he'd donated everything. "What notes?" he asked. "How many?" "5, the girl said, and a tear slipped down her cheek. 5 notes from a mother who was trying to keep her child from going hungry. The hallway seemed to tilt. Connor gripped the counter to steady himself. This stranger, this invisible woman he'd never noticed, had been carrying his mother's love around for 3 years, had been reading her words, had kept them safe. "Who are you?" Connor asked. The shy girl wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Nobody, sir. I'm nobody." But Connor was beginning to understand that she was far from nobody. She was the keeper of his past, the guardian of his mother's last words, and somehow impossibly the key to a mystery he didn't even know existed. What did this shy girl know about Connor's past that would change everything he thought he understood about power, poverty, and the invisible people who carry our stories? Her name was Haley Brooks, and for 8 months she'd cleaned Northbridge systems without anyone learning who she really was. Invisibility meant safety. It meant no one questioned her worn clothes, her skipped lunch breaks, or why she volunteered for every extra shift. Now she hurried down the hallway, clutching the lunchbox to her chest, her heart hammering. The CEO had touched her belongings, had read her private note. Connor stood watching her retreat, the note still between his fingers. His mother had written dozens just like it during the lean years after his father left, when she juggled 3 jobs to keep food on their table. He'd carried one of her notes in his wallet for years after her death, until it disintegrated from being touched too often. But this wasn't his mother's note. It couldn't be. He pulled out his phone and messaged his executive assistant. "Pull the vendor files. Night shift roster. Do it quietly." The night shift at Northbridge existed in parallel to the daytime world. While engineers burned through deadlines, another category of worker moved through the shadows: cleaners, security guards, maintenance staff. Haley navigated her rounds with practiced precision. What people never saw was how much she noticed. The exhausted intern collapsed at his desk at 2 a.m. She paused, pulled out half her sandwich, technically tonight's dinner, and placed it beside his keyboard with water. She moved on before he could wake. She did these small acts because she understood what it felt like to be too tired, to remember eating too broke, to waste a bite too proud to ask for help. Near the security checkpoint, Walt Briggs looked up from his novel. At 69, he had kind eyes and a weathered face that still cared. "Evening, Haley. You're running on empty again, aren't you?" She manufactured a smile. "I'm managing fine." She wasn't. Her phone buzzed. Her father's dialysis appointment started in 6 hours, and she still had 4 floors to finish. During her break, she called home. They talked for 3 careful minutes about safe topics, both maintaining the fiction that they weren't scared, both shielding the other from truths that tasted like failure. When she ended the call, Haley sat in harsh, fluorescent silence and permitted herself one moment to feel the weight. Then she stood, smoothed her uniform, and returned to work. What she didn't know was that Connor had spent the past hour learning details that made his jaw clench. She was classified as temporary contractor, despite 8 months of service. No benefits, no guaranteed hours. Her supervisor's note read, "Reliable but needs close management. Doesn't complain." In corporate translation, easy to exploit. Connor sat alone thinking about his mother's hands worn rough from scrubbing other people's houses. He called his assistant. "I need to speak with someone on the night shift. The woman with the blue lunchbox." "Connor, what's really happening here?" "I'm trying to understand how someone I've never met knows how to write exactly like my mother did." But the truth waiting for him was far more complicated than he could imagine. Connor Reed hadn't built a billion-dollar empire by acting on impulse, so he didn't storm down to the vendor floor making demands. Instead, he found Walt during a quiet shift change. "The night cleaner, Haley Brooks. What can you tell me about her?" Walt regarded him carefully. "Why do you want to know personal reasons?" "That's not really an answer, son." Connor pulled up a chair, eliminating the power dynamic. I found something that belonged to her. I need to understand why it matters. Walt considered this. She works like someone who literally cannot afford to be tired. Shows up early, stays late, never complains. Kind though shares half her meals with kids pulling all-nighters. Skips breaks she's legally entitled to. He leaned forward. Haley works like someone who's terrified the world will notice she exists and decide she's not worth keeping. Connor recognized that fear. He'd lived it himself. 2 nights later, he found her in the hallway. Haley, I'm Connor. I work in operations. Can we talk about the lunchbox? Her body language shifted into that invisible posture he was beginning to recognize. I apologize for leaving it in the executive area. That's not what I'm asking. The note inside. Where did it come from? Haley gripped the cart handle, knuckles white. I bought the lunchbox at a thrift store, St. Vincent's on Capitol Hill, 3 years ago. The notes were tucked inside the lid compartment. Connor's breath caught. 3 years ago, right after his mother's death, he donated everything to St. Vincent's because he couldn't bear the reminders. You kept them, he said. Yes. Her voice was quiet but fierce underneath. There were 5 notes, all from a mother trying desperately to make sure her child didn't go hungry. She lifted her gaze. It felt wrong to throw them away, like I'd be throwing away someone's love. Connor couldn't form words. She sounded like she was fighting incredibly hard, Haley continued. I kept the notes because I wished I'd had a mom who fought like that for me. Mine died before I could tell her I finally understood why she was always so exhausted. The hallway contracted around them, 2 strangers connected by grief and old paper, and the ghost of a woman who'd loved fiercely. Thank you, Connor managed, voice rough, for keeping them safe. Haley nodded, wiping her eyes. I should get back to work. Wait, do they actually help you? When things get difficult? She looked at him searchingly. Yes. They remind me that being hungry doesn't make you less than human, that surviving is its own kind of strength. After she left, Connor called his assistant. I need you to examine the vendor management contracts, specifically overtime policies and break compliance. Complete analysis before week's end. Connor, what's going on? I'm remembering what it feels like to be invisible, to be the person everyone walks past without seeing. Over the following days, Connor observed Haley carefully. He witnessed her competence, her quiet intelligence, her kindness. But he also witnessed the system that exploited her 12-hour shifts, logged as 8 breaks reduced from 30 minutes to 10, her supervisor treating her like equipment. He thought about his mother spending years scrubbing floors in buildings like this. How many people had walked past her without acknowledgement had he become exactly the kind of person his mother would have cleaned up after? That thought made him sick. The crisis erupted at exactly 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday, with an urgent email that made Priya wake Connor from the first decent sleep he'd had in days. Vendor payroll system completely crashed. Scheduling data corrupted. 72 hours before we're facing lawsuits from multiple labor agencies. Connor arrived at the office by midnight. The operations floor had descended into controlled chaos, IT frantically attempting data recovery, HR scrambling to manually reconstruct months of schedules, and Jordan Mills looking dangerously close to a complete breakdown. We're pulling backup files, Jordan explained, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. But the scheduling logic itself is completely destroyed. It's not just lost data, it's the actual rules that ran all the calculations. Someone's going to have to manually verify 8 full months of overtime records. 8 months. Connor's voice went sharp. Why would we need to go back that far? Jordan looked away, couldn't quite meet his eyes. There were certain discrepancies in how overtime was being logged versus what was actually being paid out. Connor's jaw tightened dangerously. How many workers are we talking about? All vendor staff, approximately 200 people. In the corner of the operations floor near the ancient time clock kiosk that vendor workers used for punching in and out, Haley stood frozen with her cleaning cart. She'd overheard everything, and unlike every other person crowding the room, she was staring at the kiosk's error-filled screen with an expression Connor immediately recognized, the focused look of someone actively solving a complex puzzle. "Haley," he said, crossing the space between them, "you use this system every single day." She visibly startled, clearly not expecting to be directly addressed. "Yes, sir." "Every shift?" "Yes, sir." Connor studied the screen with its cascade of angry red error messages. "Have you ever noticed anything unusual about it before tonight's crash?" Haley hesitated, her eyes darting nervously toward Jordan, toward Melissa Vance, who'd just entered, looking irritated toward the cluster of executives in expensive suits surrounding the crisis. She looked impossibly small in her simple cleaning uniform, surrounded by people wielding institutional power. "Haley," Connor said softer now, more carefully, "I'm asking because I genuinely think you might see things other people miss." She swallowed hard, visibly wrestling with some internal decision. Then she pulled out her phone, old model cracked screen, and opened her photo gallery. Connor leaned closer. Screenshots, dozens of them carefully organized. Time clock entries that didn't match the schedules posted on the official board. Overtime hours that mysteriously disappeared between punch-out and actual payday. Months of systematic wage theft meticulously documented. "I took these," Haley said quietly, her voice trembling slightly, "because I wanted proof that I wasn't imagining things. That we weren't all just imagining it." Melissa stepped forward sharply, her voice carrying clear disapproval. "This is highly inappropriate. She's not authorized to access. She's authorized to clock in and out for her own shifts." Connor cut her off cleanly. "These are her personal records, her own data." He turned his full attention back to Haley. "Can you walk me through what you're seeing here? I'm not IT staff, but you understand the logic behind it, don't you?" Haley's hands trembled visibly. She nodded once, uncertain. "I took some community college courses before everything happened. IT basics. Before my mom got too sick for me to continue." She pointed at the frozen screen with one shaking finger. "The error isn't actually in the stored data. It's in the rule set itself. Someone programmed a filter that automatically rounds down any partial hours worked, then layered another filter that caps vendor overtime at 39 hours, regardless of what was actually worked. It's deliberately buried deep in the calculation sequence where nobody would think to look." The entire room went silent. Connor turned to his lead IT specialist. "Can you verify what she's describing?" 10 minutes of frantic coding later, they had confirmation. This shy girl was absolutely right. The system had been deliberately, carefully configured to shortchange vendor workers while keeping the resulting data technically within barely legal parameters. Sophisticated wage theft hidden in lines of code. "This is genuinely brilliant analysis," Connor said, looking at Haley with something approaching awe. "How did you spot this pattern?" "Because I knew my hours weren't adding up correctly," she said simply with quiet dignity. "And when you're living right on the edge of survival, you count every single minute." "You have to." Jordan attempted to interrupt. "We should really bring in our external consultant team to properly verify." She just verified it. Connor said, his voice dropping into that cold CEO tone that made entire boardrooms go instantly quiet. And she's the only person in this room who's been genuinely honest about what this system was actually designed to accomplish. He turned back to Haley, his expression earnest. Can you help us fix this properly? I need someone who understands what the rules should actually be, not what they were designed to do. Haley looked absolutely terrified. Sir, I'm just a cleaner. I can't possibly. You're someone who solves real problems. That's exactly what I need right now. Melissa's face had become a mask of barely controlled fury. Mr. Reed, with all due respect, she's simply not qualified for this level of technical. She's qualified to be paid fairly for every hour she works, Connor stated flatly. Which is considerably more than I can say for the people who built this system in the first place. He looked at Haley again, making sure she understood this was genuine. I'm not asking you to work for free, and I'm not asking you to handle this alone. But if you're willing to help, I want your input and expertise. Yes or no. Completely your choice. Haley looked around the room at all the faces watching her, some skeptical, some curious, some openly hostile to the idea of a cleaner having valuable knowledge. She thought about her father's upcoming dialysis appointment, about rent coming due, about the precarious edge she'd been living on for so long. It felt like home. Then she thought about the other night shift workers who'd been systematically cheated, who'd trusted the system because they had absolutely no power to question it. Yes, she said quietly but clearly. But I have one condition. Connor raised an eyebrow. What's that? When this gets fixed, everyone receives full back pay. Not just going forward. Every single person who was cheated gets made completely whole. Connor felt something crack open in his chest, a respect so profound it almost hurt to contain. Agreed. You have my word. Melissa started to voice an objection. Connor held up one hand, stopping her. If there's a legal complication with that, Melissa, then we've been actively breaking the law, which means we fix it immediately or answer for it later. Your choice. 4 intense hours later, they had a corrected system running. 4 days after that, Connor had complete documentation of 2 years of systematic wage theft, totaling over $600,000. And Haley had quietly returned to her cart, put on her work gloves, and finished her regular shift like nothing fundamental had changed. But everything had changed. The company-wide town hall was scheduled for Friday at noon. Connor had announced it simply as a cultural alignment meeting, corporate language for something significant is about to change. Haley stood at the very back of the packed auditorium with the other vendor workers feeling dangerously exposed under the bright lights. She'd changed her shift schedule to attend something Jordan had made clear was highly encouraged, which translated to mandatory without being legally mandatory. When Connor took the stage, she felt her stomach drop away. She'd seen him in operations mode before, focused and intense on solving problems. But this was entirely different. This was the CEO in his element, polished and powerful, commanding the attention of hundreds of employees who hung on his every word like it was scripture. I want to talk about visibility today. Connor began, his voice carrying easily across the space. About who we actually see in our daily work and who we don't. About the people who keep this entire company running while staying carefully out of every frame, every photograph, every celebration. Haley's pulse began racing dangerously fast. This week we discovered our vendor management system had been systematically underpaying contract workers for nearly 2 years. This wasn't some accidental glitch or oversight. It was deliberately designed, and it was profoundly wrong. Surprised murmurs rippled through the assembled crowd. Connor pressed forward. We're implementing immediate reforms, completely transparent overtime policies, equal access to the same facilities as direct employees, an emergency fund for workers facing medical or family crises, and full back payment for every single hour that was stolen. Applause erupted and filled the room. Haley felt dizzy, unsteady. Then Connor spoke the words that made her entire world tilt sideways. I learned about these issues from someone most of us never truly see, someone who had the courage to document what was happening and the genuine competence to help us fix it properly. His eyes found hers across the crowded auditorium. Every single head turned to follow his gaze. Haley desperately wanted to disappear, to sink through the floor, to become invisible again, because invisible had always meant safe. The moment the meeting officially ended, she pushed through the crowd and out into the hallway, her breath coming too fast. People were looking at her differently now, some with admiration, some with curiosity, some with the calculating gaze of those wondering what she might want in return for her help. She made it to the emergency stairwell before Connor caught up with her. "Haley, wait. You weren't in operations," she said, spinning to face him. Her voice shook but carried an edge of something sharp underneath. "You let me believe you were just some middle manager. You watched me like I was some kind of test subject." Connor stopped, held up both hands in a gesture of surrender. "You're absolutely right. I should have been honest with you from the start. You think that's the real problem." Haley's eyes were bright with tears she absolutely refused to let fall. "You stood in front of hundreds of people and pointed directly at me like I was an inspirational example, like I was a symbol for your corporate reform. Did you even once ask if I wanted that kind of attention? You thought seeing me was kindness?" Haley said, her voice breaking slightly. "But you never asked if I wanted to be seen. Not by you. Not by them. Not like that. Not from above." Connor fell silent, and in that weighted quiet, Haley felt the full impact of what had actually happened. Her entire life she'd been invisible to bosses, to co-workers, to a system that treated her like a line item on a budget spreadsheet. And the first time someone finally saw her, really saw her as a person, it had been from a position of power she could never hope to match. Observation without consent. Kindness without permission. "My whole life I've been invisible," she said quietly, the words coming from somewhere deep and painful. "And the first time someone finally notices me, it's from way above, looking down." Connor's expression shifted, something in her words clearly hitting home. "You're right," he said finally. "I thought seeing people was enough. I forgot that how we see them matters just as much as whether we see them at all." He took a careful breath. "I don't want to fix this with more apologies or explanations. I want to fix it by giving you what I should have offered first: genuine choice." "What does that mean?" "It means I'm backing off completely. No more surprise recognitions. No using your story for company PR or feel-good newsletters. You return to your regular shifts, your normal schedule, whatever makes you comfortable. And if you want absolutely nothing to do with me, that's your right. I'll respect it." Haley studied him carefully, this powerful man who was finally offering her the one thing power usually refused to give: the right to walk away. "I need time," she said. "Take all the time you need." She requested an immediate shift change that night. Back to the quiet hours when the building stood empty and she could be invisible again, could disappear into her work. But this time being invisible was her choice, her decision, her power. 3 quiet weeks passed before Connor saw Haley again. He kept his promise completely. No public recognition ceremonies. No company newsletter features about inspirational vendor workers. No attempts to transform her competence into corporate motivation. He worked through Priya to implement the vendor reforms, properly listening sessions with no cameras or recordings, anonymous feedback systems that actually protected identities, emergency funds managed by independent third parties, so no one had to beg for assistance. Walt told him Haley was doing well. Still quiet, still kind to everyone around her, but she smiles more now, like something heavy finally got lifted off her shoulders. Connor didn't ask for more details than that. He'd learned that respecting someone's privacy was just as important as respecting their presence. Melissa Vance was formally demoted after the internal audit revealed years of emails pressuring vendors to sign off on schedules that violated labor law. She didn't fight the decision. On her final day, she walked past the vendor break room and saw the people she'd spent years treating as invisible, laughing together over coffee in a pantry they were now allowed to use freely. For the first time in her career, she understood that the system she'd worked so hard to protect had never actually protected her either. Jordan Mills was reassigned to a different department, permanently stripped of vendor oversight authority. The new operations manager was someone who'd worked night shifts during college who intimately understood what it meant to count every minute. Late one Tuesday evening, Connor stayed in the office working on quarterly financial reports. Around 11, he walked to the executive pantry for coffee and discovered the blue lunchbox sitting on the counter. His heart stopped beating for a moment. He approached, slowly noticed a note taped to the lid. Not his mother's handwriting. Haley's. "I keep forgetting this here. Maybe it wants to stay." Connor turned and found her standing in the doorway, not wearing her uniform this time, but jeans and a comfortable sweater, clearly off duty. "Hi," she said quietly. "Hi. Walt mentioned you'd be here tonight. I wanted to." She trailed off, then started again with more confidence. "I wanted to say thank you for backing off, for giving me space to breathe. You didn't need to thank me for basic respect." "Yes, I did, because most people don't understand that." Haley stepped into the room, picked up her lunchbox with careful hands. "I've been thinking about what you said, about fixing things through action instead of just words." Connor waited, hardly breathing. "The back pay came through. My dad's treatments are fully covered now. For the first time in 2 years, I can actually breathe without counting every dollar." Her eyes were bright with emotion. "You did that. We did that together," Connor corrected gently. "You're the one who had the courage to document what was happening, to speak up when it mattered." Haley smiled, small but genuine. "I also wanted to tell you something about the notes. Your mother's notes." Connor's throat tightened. "She must have loved you so incredibly much," Haley said softly. "To fight that hard to keep you fed. To make absolutely sure you knew you mattered even when the world said you didn't." Connor discovered he couldn't speak. "And I think," Haley continued, "she'd be proud of who you became. Not because you're successful or wealthy, but because you remembered what it felt like to be hungry, and you decided no one else should feel that way on your watch." Connor looked at this shy girl who'd kept his mother's words safe, who'd shown him what it meant to have strength without power, dignity without privilege, who'd taught him that true kindness means respecting someone's right to choose. "Would you have coffee with me sometime?" he asked carefully. "Off-site. No company talk. Just 2 people who understand what it's like to survive." Haley considered this, her expression thoughtful. "1 coffee. That's all I'm promising right now." Connor smiled, and it felt like the first genuine smile in years. 1 coffee is a beginning. She reached into her lunchbox and pulled out half a sandwich, offering it to him, with a small, knowing smile, a familiar gesture, but this time it was her choice. Here, you look like you forgot to eat again. It was heartwarming and perfect and exactly right. And sometimes the best love stories start with two people who finally learned how to see each other clearly.